They fired the discount store greeter for being too friendly with customers, claiming her behavior was making shoppers uncomfortable. Management said she asked too many questions, remembered too many details, and spent too much time watching people. But when they called security to escort 68-year-old Margaret Chen from the store, they had no idea who they were really dealing with. What they discovered next would explain why this grandmother had been watching everyone so carefully for the past 4 years. Welcome to Secrets Never Told. Before we begin this story of hidden vigilance and unexpected protection, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us make sure they are. The Valley Creek discount store sat on the edge of Millbrook like a concrete monument to American retail efficiency. Its blue and white facade dominated the intersection of Highway 12 and Maple Street, drawing customers from 3 counties who came for the low prices and stayed for the convenience of finding everything under one massive roof. Margaret Chen had been greeting customers at the main entrance for 4 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Not that anyone was counting except Margaret herself, who tracked time with the precision of someone whose life had once depended on exact schedules and careful observation. At 68, Margaret possessed the unremarkable appearance of countless American grandmothers. Her silver gray hair was styled in a practical bob. She wore comfortable walking shoes and the standard blue vest that marked her as store personnel. Her smile was warm, her manner gentle, and her voice carried the soft accent of someone who had learned English as a second language decades earlier. What made Margaret different from other greeters wasn't immediately obvious to casual observers. It was in the details. The way her eyes continuously scanned the parking lot, even while talking to customers. How she seemed to remember not just faces, but license plates, shopping patterns, and the subtle behavioral changes that most people never noticed. Store manager Brian Kowalski had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Margaret's approach to customer service. In his 5 years running the Valley Creek location, he'd never had a greeter who seemed quite so intense about the job. "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson," Margaret would say to the elderly woman who came in every Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. "How's your grandson doing with his new job in Phoenix? And I noticed you've been buying more of those diabetic snacks lately. Is everything okay with your blood sugar levels?" To Mrs. Patterson, it felt like genuine care from someone who paid attention. To Brian, it felt like surveillance that crossed professional boundaries. "Margaret," Brian said during one of their weekly check-ins, "we need to talk about customer interaction protocols. Some shoppers have mentioned that you ask a lot of personal questions." Margaret adjusted her name tag and gave him the same patient smile she'd perfected over 4 years. "I like to take interest in people, Mr. Kowalski. Isn't that what good customer service means?" "Well, yes, but there's a line between friendly and invasive. Yesterday, you asked the Morrison family about their vacation plan, their flight times, and whether they'd arranged for mail delivery while they were gone." Margaret's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. "I was just making conversation." It felt like an interrogation, and Mrs. Rodriguez said you asked her about the men who've been visiting her apartment building lately. "That's not really our business." What Brian didn't know was that the men visiting Mrs. Rodriguez's building were members of a human trafficking network that Margaret had been tracking for 8 months. What he also didn't know was that Margaret's friendly questions about vacation plan had helped her identify patterns that suggested the Morrison house might be targeted for burglary while they were away. But Margaret couldn't explain any of that without blowing the cover she'd maintained since retiring from the CIA 4 years earlier. "I'll be more careful about personal questions," Margaret said simply. The problems continued. A week later, Brian received a complaint from the Hendricks family about Margaret's behavior during their shopping trip. "She asked our teenager about his after-school activities," Mrs. Hendricks had said. "Wanted to know about his friends, where they hang out, what kind of cars they drive." It was weird. What Mrs. Hendricks didn't know was that Margaret had noticed her son interacting with known gang associates in the parking lot. The friendly questions were designed to assess whether the kid was being recruited or was already involved in activities that could put his family at risk. Brian called Margaret into his office on a Thursday afternoon, preparing to have the conversation he'd been dreading. "Margaret, I'm going to have to let you go," he said, avoiding eye contact. "We've had too many complaints about inappropriate behavior." Margaret sat quietly in the plastic chair across from his desk, her hands folded in her lap, with the stillness of someone who had received much worse news in much more dangerous circumstances. "Can you give me specific examples?" she asked. Brian consulted his notes. "Customers report that you ask invasive personal questions, that you stare at them for uncomfortable lengths of time, and that you seem to be watching their movements throughout the store, rather than just greeting them at the entrance." "I see," Margaret said quietly. "It's like you're conducting surveillance on our customers instead of providing customer customer service. People come here to shop, not to be interrogated by the greeter. Margaret almost smiled at the irony. If only he knew how accurate that assessment was. When would you like me to finish? She asked. Actually, I need you to clean out your locker today. I'll have security escort you out to make sure there are no problems. For the first time, Margaret's composure cracked slightly. Security escort? Mr. Kowalski, I've worked here for over 4 years without a single incident. I've never been late, never called in sick, never had any issues with customers beyond asking questions you consider too personal. Brian shifted uncomfortably. It's company policy for terminations. Nothing personal. 30 minutes later, store security officer Dave Martinez approached Margaret at her post near the main entrance. Dave was a decent guy, former military police, who had always treated Margaret with respect during her years at the store. Margaret, I'm sorry about this, Dave said quietly, but I need to escort you to your locker and then out of the building. Margaret nodded and gathered the few personal items she kept at her greeting station: a thermos of tea, reading glasses, and a small notebook where she jotted down observations that to anyone else would look like random customer service notes. As they walked toward the employee break room, Margaret's trained eyes automatically scanned the store one last time. Near electronics, she spotted Victor Petrov examining cell phones with the focused attention of someone looking for specific technical capabilities rather than making a casual purchase. In the pharmacy section, 2 men she'd been tracking for weeks were having a conversation that appeared casual but followed the verbal patterns of a coded exchange. After 4 years of patient observation, Margaret had identified a sophisticated network of foreign operatives using the Valley Creek discount store as a meeting point and communication hub. The store's location at a major highway intersection, its consistent traffic flow, and its policy of minimal customer monitoring made it perfect for clandestine activities. Margaret had been tracking the network's activities, documenting patterns, and feeding information to her former colleagues through carefully encrypted communications disguised as social media posts about her grandchildren. She was on the verge of exposing a cell that was gathering intelligence on local infrastructure, military families, and government employees who shopped at the store. And now she was being fired for being too observant. Margaret cleaned out her locker with methodical efficiency, placing 4 years' worth of accumulated personal items into a small cardboard box. Dave waited patiently, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. This doesn't feel right, Dave said as they walked toward the main exit. You're the best greeter we've ever had. People loved you. Not everyone, Margaret replied with a slight smile. As they approached the entrance where Margaret had spent thousands of hours watching and protecting people who never knew they needed protection, she caught sight of Victor Petrov leaving the electronics section with a small bag. He moved with the subtle confidence of someone who had just completed successful reconnaissance. Margaret knew that without her daily presence, the intelligence-gathering operation would continue undetected. Within months, the network would have enough information to potentially compromise local military installation, identify intelligence personnel, and target civilian infrastructure. But there was nothing she could do about it without exposing herself and destroying years of careful work. Dave escorted her to the parking lot, still apologizing for the awkwardness of the situation. As Margaret put her box of personal items in her Honda Civic, she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of driving home to the small apartment where she'd been living her carefully constructed retired grandmother persona, Margaret drove to the Millbrook Public Library and requested access to their computer terminal. Using encryption protocols she'd memorized decades earlier, Margaret sent a single coded message to her former handler at CIA Counterintelligence. The message was brief: cover blown, operation compromised, request immediate extraction and intervention. 18 hours later, Detective Sarah Williams of the Millbrook Police Department received a call that would prove to be the strangest of her 12-year career. Detective Williams, this is Agent Michael Torres from CIA Counterintelligence. We need to discuss a matter involving one of your local businesses and a recently terminated employee. The call led to a meeting at the Millbrook Police Station that included Detective Williams, Agent Torres, and 2 additional federal agents whose names were never officially recorded. Gentlemen, Detective Williams began, I have to say this is the most unusual briefing I've ever attended. Agent Torres opened a classified file folder. Detective, 4 days ago, a woman named Margaret Chen was terminated from her position at Valley Creek Discount Store. What we need to explain is who Margaret Chen really is and why her termination has compromised a 4-year counterintelligence operation. Detective Williams felt her understanding of small-town police work suddenly expand in directions she'd never anticipated. Margaret Chen, Agent Torres continued, is actually Dr. Margaret Chen Williams, a 26-year veteran of CIA operations who specialized in long-term surveillance and foreign intelligence identification. She retired 4 years ago and took the greeter position as cover for monitoring suspected foreign operative activity at that location. The detective stared at the photographs in the file folder, showing the friendly grandmother she'd occasionally seen around town in various exotic locations, wearing tactical gear and standing beside individuals whose faces were partially redacted for security reasons. You're telling me our discount store greeter was a CIA operative? Is a CIA operative, Agent Torres corrected. Retirement from the agency doesn't mean retirement from service to national security. Dr. Chen identified and tracked a network of foreign intelligence operatives who have been using Valley Creek Discount Store as a coordination point for gathering information on local military assets. Agent Torres pulled out additional documentation. Over the past 4 years, Doctor, Chen has documented 17 intelligence exchanges, identified 12 foreign operatives, and prevented what we now know were planning stages for attacks on regional power infrastructure and military family abductions. Detective Williams studied the surveillance photographs, communication intercepts, and behavioral analysis reports that filled the classified folder. The level of detail was extraordinary. Margaret had documented license plates, photographed suspicious individuals, recorded conversation fragments in multiple languages, and created detailed maps of the network's operational pattern. This is incredible work, Detective Williams said. Why wasn't local law enforcement informed about this operation? Standard compartmentalization protocols, Agent Torres replied. The fewer people who knew about Dr. Chen's real identity, the safer she was and the more effective her surveillance became. Unfortunately, her effectiveness at intelligence gathering made store management uncomfortable enough to terminate her employment. Detective Williams looked up from the file. And now we have a problem. Without Dr. Chen's position at the store, we lose our primary source of intelligence on this network. But we can't simply reinstate her without raising suspicions that could compromise ongoing operations or put her in personal danger. One of the unnamed federal agents spoke for the first time. Detective, we need your help to create a plausible cover story for Dr. Chen's reinstatement. Something that would make sense from a local law enforcement perspective. Detective Williams considered the situation carefully. What if there were customer complaints about her termination? What if the community rallied around a beloved employee who was wrongfully fired? That could work, Agent Torres said. But we'd need to coordinate the story carefully to avoid inconsistencies that might alert the foreign operatives. The solution they developed was elegant in its simplicity. Detective Williams would conduct a routine community relations survey about customer service at local businesses. When she discovered that Margaret Chen had been terminated despite positive customer feedback, she would recommend that the store management reconsider their decision in the interest of community relations. The story was believable, didn't involve any federal agencies, and provided a legitimate cover for Margaret's reinstatement that wouldn't raise suspicions among the foreign operative network. The solution came 24 hours later in the form of a phone call from the corporate headquarters of Valley Creek Discount Stores to store manager Brian Kowalski. Mr. Kowalski, this is Jennifer Martinez from Corporate Human Resources. We've received some concerning reports about the termination of employee Margaret Chen at your location. Brian felt his stomach drop. Ma'am, I documented all the customer complaints about her behavior. The termination was justified based on company policy. Mr. Kowalski, we've reviewed the situation, and we need Margaret Chen reinstated immediately. Furthermore, we're implementing new customer service protocols that will require additional training for all management staff. I don't understand. The complaints were legitimate. Mr. Kowalski, what customers actually reported was that Mrs. Chen provided exceptional service, remembered their needs, and made them feel valued. The complaints you documented appear to have been based on misunderstandings of company policy regarding customer engagement. Brian was confused, but not stupid enough to argue with corporate headquarters. When should I contact Mrs. Chen about returning to work? Immediately. And Mr. Kowalski, Mrs. Chen will be receiving a promotion to Senior Customer Experience Specialist, with additional responsibilities for monitoring customer satisfaction and safety. The next morning, Margaret Chen returned to Valley Creek Discount Store with an official letter of reinstatement, a pay raise, and new duties that included comprehensive observation of customer experience and identification of potential safety concerns. Store manager Brian Kowalski apologized profusely for the misunderstanding, though he never quite understood what had changed at the corporate level to reverse his decision so dramatically. Margaret, I want you to know that I was just following what I thought was company policy, Brian said as she returned to her greeting station. I understand, Mr. Kowalski, Margaret replied with the same patient smile she'd worn for 4 years. Sometimes it takes time for people to appreciate the value of paying attention. As Margaret resumed her position at the store entrance, Viktor Petrov returned to the electronics section, unaware that his intelligence-gathering activities were once again under the watchful eye of someone far more dangerous than a friendly grandmother. Margaret's enhanced authority as senior customer experience specialist allowed her to move freely throughout the store, ostensibly checking on customer satisfaction, but actually conducting comprehensive surveillance of the foreign operative network. Her new duties provided perfect cover for approaching suspicious individuals, photographing evidence, and monitoring communications. Within her first week back, Margaret had documented increased activity among the network members. Viktor Petrov was no longer just conducting routine surveillance, he was actively recruiting local assets and gathering specific technical information about regional infrastructure. 2 new operatives had joined the network, both with specialized skills in explosives and cyber warfare. Margaret's intelligence reports, encrypted and transmitted through seemingly innocent social media posts about her fictional grandchildren, painted a disturbing picture. The network was in the final planning stages of a coordinated attack designed to disable the regional power grid during a major holiday weekend, when emergency response would be limited and the impact on civilian populations would be maximized. The breakthrough came when Margaret overheard a conversation between Viktor Petrov and his new handler, conducted in Serbian near the automotive section. Her linguistic training allowed her to understand their discussion of the 4th of July gift and electrical fireworks that would darken 3 counties. The coded language was clear enough for someone with Margaret's experience to recognize as planning for infrastructure sabotage. Margaret immediately triggered emergency protocols, sending a coded message that would reach CI by counterintelligence within minutes. Fireworks planned for Independence Day. 3-county grid target. Immediate intervention required. The response was swift and decisive. Within 48 hours, a joint FBI-CIA task force had positioned agents throughout the region, ready to intercept the network when they moved to execute their plan. 3 weeks later, Detective Williams received another call from Agent Torres. "Detective, thanks to Dr. Chen's continued surveillance, we've been able to arrest 7 members of the Foreign Intelligence Network and prevent a planned attack on the regional power grid. What about Margaret? Will she stay at the store?" "For as long as necessary." Dr. Chen understands that protection often requires patience, and some of the most important work happens in the most ordinary places. 6 months later, Margaret Chen still greets customers at Valley Creek Discount Store. She still asks about their families, remembers their shopping pattern, and pays careful attention to the people who move through her domain. The difference is that now she does it with official support, enhanced authority, and the knowledge that her work has prevented attacks that could have endangered thousands of innocent people. Store manager Brian Kowalski has learned to appreciate Margaret's thorough approach to customer service, though he still doesn't entirely understand why corporate headquarters considers her such a valuable employee. What he doesn't know is that Margaret's performance reviews now come directly from CIA personnel evaluations rather than standard retail metrics. Margaret's daily routine appears largely unchanged to casual observers. She arrives early, positions herself at the main entrance, and watches over the community that has unknowingly been under her protection for over 4 years. But her work now extends far beyond the foreign operative network she helped dismantle. The success of Operation Silent Guardian, as the CIA had designated Margaret's undercover work, had demonstrated the value of long-term surveillance in retail environments. Margaret now coordinates with a network of similar operatives positioned in shopping centers, community centers, and public gathering places across the region. Her intelligence reports, still disguised as social media posts about fictional grandchildren, now feed into a sophisticated early warning system that monitors for terrorism planning, human trafficking operations, and foreign intelligence activities throughout the Pacific Northwest. The elderly woman asking about your grandchildren's school schedule might be assessing whether your family has attracted the attention of predators. The friendly greeter who remembers your work schedule could be ensuring that your routine hasn't made you a target for foreign operatives seeking to compromise defense contractors. Margaret's work has evolved from reactive observation to proactive community protection. She identifies potential threats before they fully develop, coordinates with law enforcement to prevent crimes before they occur, and maintains a web of subtle surveillance that keeps entire communities safe without anyone realizing they're being protected. But sometime, late at night when she's reviewing her observation, Margaret reflects on the irony that she was nearly fired for being too good at a job that most people didn't realize she was actually doing. The foreign intelligence threat to small American communities is real and ongoing. Margaret's work at Valley Creek Discount Store represents just one front in a hidden war that most citizens never know exists. Behind the mundane facade of retail employment, a network of intelligence professionals maintains constant vigilance against those who would harm innocent people. Margaret takes pride in knowing that families sleep safely in their homes because someone is always watching, always listening, always ready to act when threats emerge from the shadows. Her greatest satisfaction comes not from the commendations she receives from CIA leadership, but from the knowledge that Mrs. Patterson can continue her weekly shopping trips without fear, that the Morrison children can play safely in their neighborhood, and that the community she protects will never know how many dangers have been quietly neutralized before they could cause harm. Margaret's daily routine remains largely unchanged. She arrives early, positions herself at the main entrance, and watches over the community that has unknowingly been under her protection for over 4 years. But sometimes, late at night, when she's reviewing her observations, Margaret reflects on the irony that she was nearly fired for being too good at a job that most people didn't realize she was actually doing. The grandmother who greets you with a warm smile and asks about your family might just be the person standing between your community and threats you'll never know existed. Have you ever encountered someone whose friendliness seemed just a little too observant? Share your experiences in the comments below and let us know what city you're watching from today. Thank you for watching Secrets Never Told. If this story moved you, please subscribe and share it with others who appreciate tales of hidden protection and everyday heroes. These stories matter, and your support helps us tell them. Until next time, remember that the most effective guardians are often the ones you least expect.